really economic circles that drives conflict. Why does ethnicity seem to matter so much? And on this subject, I've actually written quite a bit in recent times. I don't want to go through I didn't want to go through all of these papers for you, but I just wanted to say a little bit about a recent paper of mine with Joan in the American Economic Review. The view that we propose in this paper is that ethnicity really is a marker by which you extract a larger share of the economic pie through conflict. And so typically when we think about conflict, we think about conflict across groups that are economically different. Right? And the important point here, which I've highlighted over here, is that the economic viewpoint really pushes you to the opposite extreme. That conflict tends to occur across ethnic groups whose incomes are relatively similar, because they're engaged with the same kind of occupations. They're earning the same sorts of incomes. So my group is possibly driving out people from your group who want the same sorts of jobs. So you actually end up seeing, even in a society with a lot of economic inequality, the conflicts happening between groups that are relatively similar. And I just wanted to, I didn't want to go into my AER paper in detail, but I just want to tell you a little bit about Hindu-Muslim conflict in India, where some of these results of this are quite staggering. Now, I don't know whether this can be applied in the Turkish context. Okay? We can think about it, we can talk about it. I suspect that some of these ideas apply and some of them don't. But let me tell you at least what you see for Hindu-Muslim. So this last part of my talk is really motivated by the recent, by the ongoing Hindu-Muslim violence in India. Okay? So for those of you who don't know about it, India was partitioned in the 1940s into Pakistan and India. Okay? But strong religious minorities in India are the Muslims, okay? And many of them migrated to Pakistan. But a sizable fraction of them remain in India. And the ratios are approximately the same ratios as the ratios of Turks to Kurds. Okay? So there will be about 80% Hindus and about 20% Muslims. Okay? And the violence between Hindus and Muslims in India is a little bit different from what one might expect here, because Hindus and Muslims live in close proximity to each other, and they're mixed up, they're not geographically separated. Okay? There isn't one area where Muslims are predominant and another area where Hindus are predominant. Okay? In every major city of India, especially in every urban India, Hindus and Muslims live in very close proximity. And the violence flares up occasionally every time over the various decades that India has been independent. And the typical kind of violence is, for example, the one that took place in Gujarat in 2002, is where poor Hindus, okay, people who are actually economically badly off, participating in violence against middle class and rich Muslims, right? And that violence being funded by rich Hindus. Okay. Now, it also goes the other way around when that violence is being perpetrated against the Hindus. And I want to tell you about a little empirical exercise that a student of mine, Anirban Mitra, and I have been working on. The question is, in this empirical exercise, is that can we identify who the aggressor is? Okay? Are these the Hindus perpetrating the violence, or are these the Muslims perpetrating the violence? Now, if you go to the newspapers in India, if you ever, I hope some of you have visited India, and if not, I hope some of you will. Okay? It's very much like being here. It's a very nice, interesting country. But one of the things that you will have a constant debate in the newspapers is finger pointing. Okay? No, it's the Hindus that started this incident. No, it's the Muslims that started this incident. And of course, it's impossible to disentangle one from the other because people with different ideological proclivities on this will side with one camp or the other, right? So my parents are of Hindu background, they will side with the Hindus. People with the Muslim background will side with the Muslims, right? And it is extremely difficult in any particular incident to point out that the Hindus or the Muslims were responsible. But there is an interesting way in which you can try and get at this question using economic data. Okay? And the idea, I'll tell you about this data set in a second, but let me just tell you about the test that we have. So the test relies on the assumption, okay, and this is not a deduction, but it's the assumption that Hindu-Muslim violence has a strong economic impact. So the informal description of the model is the following. So imagine that there are two groups, A and B, okay? And I purposely call them A and B to distinguish. I don't care who are the Hindus and who are the Muslims. Okay? And I want to think about economic violence between A and B and assume that A is the aggressor. Okay? Now if group A is the aggressor, then notice, and you can write down a theory of this, but it makes a lot of sense, that if you increase the incomes of group B, this is going to increase violence if A is the aggressor. Okay? Because there is more to grab from the other side. On the other hand, if group A's incomes goes up, and if A is the aggressor, then it has an ambiguous effect on violence. Okay? And why is there an ambiguous effect on violence? Well, one is that it's easier to finance violence if you have more income. Okay? But two, the opportunity cost of violence is very high. Okay? If I'm earning more income, I'm not going to go on the streets trying to kill other people, okay? Because the opportunity cost of that is very high. Okay? So it suggests that if group A is the instigator, if we assume that, then in the empirical data, if you look at the data, it should show that when group B's incomes goes up, this should have a significant effect on conflict. And when group A's incomes goes up, it should have an ambiguous effect on conflict. So now for group A, let's call them H or M. For group B, let's call them H or M, and let's see what the data has to say. Okay, so this is the very last part that we talked about. But notice that this methodology is not fully general. It makes sense when groups have strong economic interactions, for example, when both are employed in the same sector. So this is a map of Hindu-Muslim violence in India. Okay? As you can see, the dark areas are the one with the greater amount of violence. Luckily, where I come from, which is Calcutta, there's almost no Hindu-Muslim violence. Okay? But Gujarat has very high amounts of violence. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh has very high amounts of violence. So we were given this data set put together by these two amazing political scientists called Ashutosh. Data from the National Sample Survey. So we matched these two pieces of data together. Okay? And then we put in other controls. Overall population, our good friend, religious polarization, we put all that stuff. And I just want to conclude by just telling you the results that we get. So this is looking at the dependent variable is casualties in Hindu-Muslim violence at the regional level. Okay? A 4-year average, starting, it's lagged by 3 years from the right-hand side. Okay? And on the right-hand side, we have Muslim income, Hindu income, a time dummy, population, Muslim percentage, or religious polarization. Okay? And then we also have lagged casualties. And it turns out that in every one of these regressions that you run, the Muslim variable, the Muslim income variable, is positive and highly significant in explaining violence. And the Hindu per capita income variable is invariably insignificant. Now, there could be 100 different explanations to this, but what I find very intriguing about it seems to suggest exactly in line with the theory that you have to give the label group B, in the Indian case, to the Muslims. Okay? If you believe the theory, because it suggests that it's their change in incomes which is driving the amount of conflict.
Sorry, have you got data on wealth?
We have no data on wealth. We don't even have direct data on incomes.
Right, so you drive income
from consumption expenditure. Right. Yeah. I know what you're getting at. It's a good point, but we don't have that. Now, I want to just tell you that the effects are large. Right? Again, if you take Muslim income and increase it by 10%, the predicted amount of casualties goes up by 20%. It's a very large effect. Now, could there be other reasons? Could there be other ways in which we can explain it? So one standard thing is whenever you see a regression like this, you should suspect that there is some sort of omitted variable or some sort of endogeneity. What kind of endogeneity problem could there be? One endogeneity problem is that violence might be causing incomes. Okay? But would you expect violence to increase Muslim incomes? I wouldn't. Okay? But in case we do, we can actually run that regression. Okay? So let me show you here. So this is incomes regressed on current violence. Okay? So the opposite regression. And as you can see, that if you regress Muslim incomes on current violence, the effect is negative, as one would expect. Okay? The more violence, the lower is Muslim income, which is suggesting that if anything, violence tends to reduce Muslim incomes. So our effect is even stronger, okay? Because this effect is not being taken into account. If you regress Hindu incomes on violence, there's no significance at all. So this suggests, I think, in my opinion, an interesting way of testing, in some situations at least, who can be the aggressor in a conflict that's completely mixed up, okay, by just looking at the economic data. Now, of course, you may not believe that the economics creates the violence, in which case there is nothing to test. Okay? But if you believe that the economics might create the violence, this is an interesting way of trying to test. Okay, I am going to summarize because I'm way over. So to summarize this long and interrupted talk, several authors have advanced cultural explanations for underdevelopment. Scholars have suggested links between conflict and ethnic differences. But studies that employ a well-known measure of ethnic and religious fragmentation show no links with conflict, though there are links with economic growth. I argue for the use of a very different measure, which is a polarization index. And the measure has a philosophical foundation which may turn out to be useful in other applications. And then a simple yet general behavioral model of conflict links predicted conflict closely to polarization and fractionalization. And the former link is larger, the larger the importance of public goods, broadly defined. I then discuss an empirical study which uses this polarization measure to exhibit a robust and positive relationship between ethnic or religious polarization and the incidence of conflict. Finally, I discuss an economic test for identifying aggressors in conflict, and I apply this to Hindu-Muslim conflict in India. And the test strongly suggests that in India, at least, Hindus have been the aggressors. So I hope that despite the interruptions, some of these topics will be of interest to the students and that you can take it to your own. Thanks a lot.